to just briefly bring the conversation back to this notion of primary historicization because it reminds me of something discussed in The Ego and the Other. That's on page 45 of Seminar 1. And while you were talking about the misguided sort of concept of primary historicization as we might commonly think of it as a kind of substance, something substantial that analysis would rework or find the essence of, I'm reminded of what is discussed here concerning the dream. And I don't think this is entirely irrelevant, but it's almost as if analysis of the dream is almost kind of a microcosm of maybe what happens in analysis as a whole. But he says here, what is the dream? Is the subject's reconstitution of it accurate? What guarantee do we have that a later verbalization isn't mixed in with it? Isn't every dream a thing of the moment to which the subject's speech gives a history? And he says also, the more uncertain the text that the subject gives us, the more meaningful it is. It is in the very doubt that the subject casts on certain bits of the dream that Freud, who listens to it, who expects it, who is there in order to reveal its meaning, clearly recognizes what is important. And then 2 lines later, he says, the most significant dream would be the dream that has been completely forgotten. And that really surprised me because this is something that, I've often contemplated because I don't remember my dreams all that accurately. And I think that a lot of people tend to embellish their dreams in the retelling. But I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Lacan would say it's those embellishments that are really at the heart of the matter.
I mean, I like all of that. I mean, the idea that the more one fabricates or overlays or in a way, and it is a bit counterintuitive, right? The more one subjects the dream to kind of almost, you could say, to heighten the point, like a kind of fallacious retelling, that it still remains important, even maybe more so. And, Freud is confronted with this point in interpretation of dreams because, the obvious contention, which, we've all bumped up against, is that what emerges in the clinical domain of the retelling is not the dream. It's hugely different from the dream, hence secondary revision. And one of Freud's ideas is that, well, if the defenses and the distortions and the disguises of the dream work are in a sense still apparent and are continued in secondary revision and also in the forgetting of dreams, then that material is still useful for us. And then maybe just to also note that point, Freud spends a fair amount of time on that in interpretation of dreams, saying, isn't it fascinating that dreams are forgotten so quickly? And, we, I think, ordinarily just treat it as, well, like, obviously, you forget a dream, it's just a dream. But for Freud, that is something that needs to be accounted for. And the rapidity, the rapidness with which one forgets a dream is itself something to be investigated. And one would then, I think, also be able to argue for Freud, which sounds very psychoanalytic, that when people complain that they don't dream, Freud would take that almost as an evidence that there's a lot of dreaming happening, or there's a lot of good content happening in the dreams. And similarly, the fact that things are forgotten and how amazingly quickly they're forgotten would be seen as itself part of the dream work and part of I suppose we could be a little bit different here and talk about the censorship. But all of those things indicate that there's something of significance in the dream. So a couple of thoughts about that. Number one, in analysis, I would often be confronted by, I would say things, I can't remember what I dreamt about last night. Oh, it's very vague. And then the analyst would go, what did you dream? And I just said, I can't really remember. He'd said, tell me what you dreamt. And then I would, stumble and try and pick out something. And then sometimes I kind of knew it was bullshit, but like I would speak it. And not always, but often that would take us somewhere. So that was the one thought. The other is Freud does say, actually, he says a bunch of things. The thing we all remember about those trivial dream elements, he'll say those are often the ones where one could begin an analysis. Because if the subject, the dreamer, discards them as of peripheral significance, that's a great clue as that via displacement, that those are probably the best, the most important things. So one should start there. And he also says, and maybe this is the context to some of the comments Lacan is offering there, because, Lacan talks about the completely forgotten dream being the most valuable, to which one has to retort, but it's completely forgotten. But of course, I think partly what he's getting at is, well, if it's a completely forgotten dream, there was something. Because it's forgotten, to even speak about it having been a forgotten dream means that it was a dream. But I suppose the other context is just to say that that presumably implies valuable content, that it was forgotten so quickly. And yeah, just to reiterate that, Freud says, I think in Interpretation of Dreams and elsewhere, what's particularly useful is that in the course of talking about something, about a dream, a fragment reappears that had been forgotten. That's great. That's valuable. And maybe that's part of this weird psychoanalyst sensibility of saying, tell me the dream, almost as if there's an insistence that you do remember, you just don't remember that you've remembered. Because then sometimes it works, and sometimes I do bullshit, but sometimes in the process of doing that, I might stumble onto something that seems to be of some value. But it's also nice because, it's almost like the fabrication itself is valuable. And, you've probably heard me talk about this, but in thinking about dream interpretation technique, Freud's also got that thing, ask the dreamer to tell the dream a second time, which is a bit like, in a bad TV cop show, tell me again when you were on the night of the Friday the 15th or whatever. Why did Derek pick Friday the 15th? Interesting question. You should be asking, what's it about Friday the 15th? But anyways, what happens when one has to tell the story a second, a third time, or the dream a second or third time? There'll be some inconsistencies. And that's where Freud wants us to go to, the inconsistencies.
It's very interesting, though, that we're talking about like the forgetting is more important, because this definitely contrasts with Jungian dream analysis or dream symbolism, because ironically, like, even though I'm obsessed with Lacanian theory, clinical aspect, and Freudian theory, I go under Jungian analysis. And there's never really this emphasis on, oh, you don't remember your dream yesterday. It's more of like, well, do you remember a dream that you had the other night? And then I'll go on about that. And it's more of like, the more you remember your dream, the more it's like this complex repetition of the archetype trying to manifest these impulses. What I want to build up to in this emphasis of forgetting, because one, it seems almost dialectical, but two, and I'm jumping a little ahead from seminar 1, but this is something that is brought up in the beginning of seminar 2 with his interest in elaborating on the lecture of the Meno and using the Maieutics, not to say that psychoanalysis is the Maieutics, but in this form of making this knowledge of remembering, the remembering of the subject. And it seems like in the way that you forgot the dream, and he asked, the analyst will ask the question or say, tell me the dream. It's like almost guiding you in the same way of the form of Maieutics would, especially Socrates trying to teach the slave boy geometry. Am I right or wrong about that?
You know what? I don't know if it's a question of being right or wrong. I think it's a useful analogy. It's an interesting way to play up something of maybe what's distinctive or about what is being attempted there. I mean, I have this, as far as I recall, there's lots of facets of Socrates that Lacan loves, particularly actually the process of being encouraged to put things into speech. So yeah, I mean, let's think a little bit about that. And of course, the other is to do some kind of questioning or a speech encounter from a position of not knowing, where one is constantly reminded, particularly as an analyst, that one simply does not know. And I mean, I think that's a seminar 1 and seminar 2, or maybe it's seminar 2, but this whole like position of ignorance that one should be in. Let me see. I actually just was looking at it a few minutes ago. Ignoratia doctra. Oh, here we go. This is a nice quote from seminar 1. Well, maybe you obviously know that because that's where anyways, but it's just fortuitous that I also got it. Okay, psychoanalysis is a dialectic. The art of conversation of Socrates, this is Lacan from page 278 of seminar 1, is to teach the slave to give his own speech its true meaning. In other words, the position of the analyst must be that of an ignorantia doctor, which is learned ignorance, which does not mean knowing, but which is capable of being formative for the subject.